TitleMatchNetwork.com.
Now, you knew we were going to have to bring this up. nWo. Let's talk about it. How did the signing of Kevin Nash and Scott Hall come about?
Rob, I wish I remembered, more specific details, but again, it was so long ago and so much, I've talked about it so much and other people have talked about it so much that I'm not sure it doesn't all get commingled into a version of the reality. But
there's a version that they through DDP came to you, and then there's a version that you had DDP approach them.
They came to me through DDP.
Okay.
Actually, I'll take that back. Scott came to me through DDP. I may have gone to DDP about Kevin when I heard that he was coming up and he was going to be available. But honestly, I don't recall.
Okay. It's been said that you had came up with the concept for the Outsiders invading after attending a New Japan show and seeing New Japan versus UWFI. Is that correct?
That is not correct.
Okay.
It is not correct.
Okay.
And I read that recently. Actually, I think Jim Ross may have said it, or I heard it on his podcast, or somebody reported it on his podcast. That is not true. What is true is that I was influenced greatly by some of the things that I saw in Japan, just like I was with Benoit and Guerrero and Malenko. And what influenced me the most was the reality and the perception within the mainstream media and within the audience that what was happening was real and that there were real battles between UWF or whoever it was at the time. I can't remember the name of the companies anymore, but Inoki and whoever it was, Baba, war and all that. And then realizing that it was all pretty much, manufactured for a good purpose, but they did a great job at it, and the media covered it. I'd go over to Tokyo Dome and have 90,000 people in the arena, and it would be on the front page of the sports page the next day. And I was like, God, we can't even buy advertising on the sports page, and they're covering it like news. How do they do that? And they did it by creating that sense of urgency and reality and takeover and invasion. So there wasn't a specific thing that I saw somebody else doing in a formula. It was the kind of macro approach to the business that I saw in Japan over the course of a couple of years that made me think, how do I get that same sense of reality here?
Obviously, realism was a big part of the Outsiders' debut, as was playing off the idea that they were WWE talents. Where does those concepts come from? And how important was it to get away from the standard wrestling logic at the time?
This I can't speak to because I remember it. Certain things I remember very clearly, just like going and locking myself in a room and trying to come up with something different than. When I knew, and it's funny, it's not like I had this idea and then, I'm going to bring Scott Hall in and I'll bring Kevin in to execute the idea. These things kind of all happened almost, if I'm going to bring them in, what am I going to do? Because the nWo, not that I knew what I was going to call it or how I was going to do it, but the general concept started to take shape in my head probably 6 months before. Maybe more, maybe less, but before. And then when Scott became available, and ultimately Kevin, it started to click for me. And one of the things that clicked was the reality of the situation. Now, I'm not going to lie to you or anybody else and say that I didn't want to walk that fine line of making it look like they were from WWE, but that wasn't the real motivator. The real motivator was both Scott and Kevin had worked at WCW before, felt that they were misused, mistreated, and abused, went over to WWF to become big stars, and now they were coming back to extract their revenge. That's it. Everything else kind of came along with it rather easily and almost coincidentally, as opposed by design. So it wasn't as Machiavellian and, quite honestly, as intelligent and artistic as sometimes it's made out to be. I just went, wait a minute. I know what's working over there. This is real because they both used to work here. They can come back and be pissed off and take it out on WCW and take over the company and prove their point. That's pretty basic storytelling. That was the essence of that idea.
When did you sit back and go, you know what? I got something here. When did you realize that you had something?
Before I started it.
Before you started it?
Yeah.
You knew going into it. Did you know it was going to be with Kevin and Scott?
Oh, yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. Okay. I didn't know who number 3 was going to be
right
once we started it, but I knew. Yeah, I knew.
Did you always know that you wanted a third?
Oh yeah.
Okay. Is it true the plan for the third member for the NWO was going to be Sting if Hawk balked at turning heel?
Absolutely true.
Okay. How hard was it to get Hogan to make that move?
It was hard. And the backstory of that was I had wanted to turn Hulk heel 6 months prior to that, approximately. And I did my best to convince him. And in the most polite way he could possibly do so, he threw me out of his house.
What was his reasoning?
Just didn't want to do it. His response to me was, I'll never forget, I make jokes about it with him now, but it's like, as I'm pitching, he's doing this. Stroking his Fu Manchu. I got done pitching and he's still stroking his Fu Manchu. Brother, I got to pick the kids up from school. Thanks for coming by. You'll never know my character until you walk a mile in my yellow boots. See ya. Whoa, fuck. I mean, that's almost verbatim
Right.
how it went. And he was very nice about it. It was probably nicer than the way I communicated it just now. But he basically threw me out of the house. Didn't want to talk about it. That was it. And then at that time, he had 4 pay-per-view appearances and some TVs leading up to that. That was part of his contract. And we had already used up, I think, all of them, or maybe we had one left or something. I don't remember what it was. And he went off to go do a movie. Santa with Muscles, actually, is the movie that he was doing at the time. He went off to go do a movie. Well, from the time that I went and pitched him, and then he went off to go do a movie, that's when everything started with Scott, Kevin. And then I got a phone call from Hulk. Brother, what are you doing? Come on out to California. I'm stuck on a movie set, but come on out to California. I want to talk to you. I said, sure. So I flew out to California and I sat down, went into his trailer. He's in there, he had a 12-pack of beer, Cuban cigar, and handed me a cigar and a beer, and we're relaxing a little bit. Who's the third guy? I said, I'm not telling. He goes, I know who it should be. I said, okay, tell me about it. Because he had been watching.
And he saw the money too, obviously.
Well, yeah, come on. I mean, that's the narrative.
Right.
Did he see the momentum? Of course. He's not stupid. Did he know that it was the right time if he's ever going to turn heel? Look, Hulk, it's just, people are so predisposed to judge him negatively that way. It was a good thing. He's a guy that knows his value. Now, he knew when he was a babyface in WCW towards the end of his first run there, he knew it wasn't working. He knew what people were saying and how they were reacting when he went out to ringside. He didn't like that. He knew that wasn't what he wanted or what was good for the company. But until somebody presented him with an idea that made a lot of sense to him, he wasn't willing to risk the value whatever value there was. It may have only been 60% of what it was, but it's still 45% more than we had in anybody else. And he didn't want to risk that unless it was the right idea. And sure, he saw that it was the right idea. And to a degree, I guess that's, self-serving, but it was also the best thing for the company.
Right. Do you think the NWO would have taken off the same if Sting would have turned heel?
No.
Why is that?
It just wouldn't have been as shocking. That moment when Hulk Hogan turned heel in Daytona Beach was shocking.
Yeah.
There has not been another moment quite like that in the business since that day. And I don't know that there ever will be, in my opinion. That was a big deal. It was 25 years in the making. It was a character that had never turned before. It was an amazing moment.
What are your memories of that night?
I have a lot of them. Stress being one of them, because I didn't know for sure that Hulk was actually going to do it until I saw him walk into the building. I wasn't sure because Hulk it was a big move for him, and he can get himself worked up or down pretty easily. Or back then, not so much anymore, not at all anymore. But back then, he was volatile. And depending on who he was talking to or how he was feeling, his point of view could change, especially about something that big.
Did Kevin Sullivan have any influence on him? Because we did an interview with Kevin. Kevin said he slept at his house one night or something. God.
I'll get to Kevin in a minute.
Okay.
Kevin was instrumental in this to a degree. but I didn't know for sure. And it was kind of tough because not knowing that Hulk was going to call me up and invite me to California. The plan was we already started the plan. It was happening. Okay. Now it was, okay, who do I make that third guy? Who's that big surprise? Because going back to surprises, which was a big part of my formula. What do we do? Sting was the obvious candidate because I didn't think Hulk was going to do it. So I had talked Sting into it, and Sting was a lot like Hulk in that respect, in terms of making that change. He didn't want to do it if it wasn't the right idea. And it took a lot for me to get Sting to do it. Then I get the phone call from Hulk. So now I got to keep Sting as a backup plan because I wasn't 100% positive that Hulk was actually going to go through with it until he walked into the building.
Right.
So that was the background and the context. Now we get to that night. I couldn't have Hulk come to the building early because I've been reading about this shit. So I had to keep him away. I knew he was volatile. And I couldn't talk to him. I couldn't manage him. So that's where Kevin Sullivan came in to try to keep him grounded and keep him on track.
Any feedback at all from Turner Broadcasting about the decision to turn Hogan heel?
No. They never ever got involved in creative. They never asked to see it. Well, until the end when I got into the Time Warner AOL culture, but they never asked to see it. Unless it was something stupid that I did, nudity or dropping F-bombs on TV or something like that. They never ever got involved.
Kevin, where did the idea for you to get Powerbomb through the table come from? Whose idea was that?
I don't know. I doubt it was anybody else's but mine. I can't imagine Kevin at 7 foot tall and 300 pounds would have said, "Hey, little non-wrestler, 45-year-old, overweight guy, let me pick you up and drop you 12 feet through the air and powerbomb you through the floor or through the table."
Right.
I don't think he would have done that. I probably volunteered for that.
Did you feel by taking that bump you were showing your roster that you were willing to do anything for the cause?
No, that wasn't my intention at all. The intention was to do something shocking. Keep in mind, go back in time. The rule was, there were certain rules in wrestling. Don't go on the air 5 minutes early and give away that your competition's finished. That was one of them. But you never laid a hand on an announcer, ever. I mean, I knew Vern would be livid when I did that. That was important.
Right.
Okay, I needed to break that rule, and I wanted to break it in a big way.
Okay. What led you to becoming a member of the nWo? Did you ever feel like it was a mistake to put yourself at the forefront of the top angle?
Again, I don't know if it was my idea, if it was suggested to me. I don't know where it started from. It's always hard to remember where an idea started because sometimes it just, you come up with an idea and then I hear a fragment of what you say and I throw it over to this guy and then he takes it and it turns into this idea. And then by the time you're done with it, you don't know where it started really. Everybody participated in it. I knew I had heat. I've always had heat. I had heat the minute I stepped into this business. For Vern, I had heat. And clearly by that time, I had a ton of heat. So it wasn't like a giant fucking leap to go, well, wait a minute, why don't I turn because it was part of the story. I was the president of WCW legitimately and as a character, it was kind of just made sense. From a creative point of view, but I don't remember if it was my idea or not. And as far as, do I think it was a mistake? No, I mean, clearly, for a long time, it worked for a lot of people. I got a lot of people over kicking my ass.
Easy for you to play the character?
Yeah.
How far-fetched was the character from the real Eric Bischoff?
Quite a bit, actually. I mean, it's easy for me to play it.
Right.
Especially at that time, because I was the president of the company. It wasn't like a giant stretch. I wasn't an actor coming in trying to pretend I knew what the wrestling business was about. I had 15 or 18 years worth of equity with the wrestling audience in terms of who I was in real life, that it was not a big shift to turn that into a character and just abuse that power. That was easy to do. But I wasn't that guy by any stretch of the imagination.
Talk about the process of creating the nWo as a separate entity with the music and the commercial advertisements, etc.
As from what I can recall. Once we saw that we had what we had, and we knew it was successful, we knew that we also had to do a show on Thunder by that time. I had to have 2 different shows. I wanted to be able to compete with myself, not unlike SmackDown and Raw tried to.
Right.
Remember going back to the draft and crossovers. They were trying to create their own competition. That's what that was. I tried it before them. That was the whole idea. Okay, we know that this nWo brand, as a brand, was actually more successful than the WCW brand. It did better licensing and merchandising, and it was a more culturally popular thing. I said, okay, we've got this powerful brand. I have this 2-hour show now. I need to go over to TBS. It wasn't my choice. It was forced upon me. So what do? Let's do a WCW versus nWo. 2-brand thing. That was the idea. And that's why people say, you ruined it because you built the roster. Well, guess why? Because I had to. It's not because I wanted to, because I had to.
I was going to ask if there was ever a concern of adding too many members of the group. Yeah.
Not when you have to produce another 2-hour show in prime time.
Okay. And obviously that's why you added, the Giant, who was the 4th member, and so on. Was there ever a concern that nWo was so hot that it actually hurt WCW's own brand?
And maybe not from a brand perspective, but I do remember talent coming to me and being and rightfully so, by the way, because we had changed the formula so much where we had these heels, quote unquote heels, but the audience was digging that shit. And that upended the status quo and the formula quite a bit. So our baby faces, our protagonists, all of a sudden didn't quite understand how they were supposed to get over when they were trying to make a comeback on somebody that the audience loved. So it became confusing.
And what would you tell the talent?
Oh, I don't recall specific conversations, but by that time I knew that we were on enough of a roll that my kind of mandate to everybody was to just make this stuff work. Don't worry so much about how you're getting over or what's going to happen to your character. Let's worry about telling the story and keeping this thing intact.
Why did the nWo Sold Out pay-per-view not work as a separate entity?
It's hard to say why Sold Out didn't work as a separate entity. It should have. It could have been the time of year. It could have been the story that was driving it might not have been right. It could have been any number of things. It's hard for me to look back at that and go, I don't think I even analyzed it back then.
Were you surprised when WWE decided to sue over WCW, allegedly infringing on the Razor and Diesel copyrights?
I don't think I was surprised. I don't remember how I felt about it. I mean, obviously, I was.
How did you react?
I thought we were right. I didn't do anything wrong. I didn't feel like I did. Now I got a little bit of an education in federal court, by the way, when it comes to trademark and copyright law. But at the time, I didn't think that I did anything wrong. Looking back at it now, knowing what I know now and the experience that I have now, being on both sides of that equation, it's easy to step in that puddle of mud if you don't know what you're doing, and I clearly I did.
Did you talk to Kevin and Scott and say, hey, maybe you can't do this before you went to court, like the mannerisms or anything? No. Okay. Just let him do a thing until it went to court.
Well, because before we got sued, I didn't think I was doing anything wrong.
Right.
I mean, the Scott Hall was Scott Hall before he left. Kevin Nash was Kevin Nash before he left. Now, this was me not quite being as thoroughly versed in trademark and copyright law infringement, but the toothpick and it wasn't the big things; it was the little things that got us into trouble.
Okay. Kevin Nash has claimed that when WWE decided to bring in imposter versions of Razor and Diesel, that WCW thought something had happened to nullify their deals with Nash and Scott and had signed them to new contracts for larger paydays. What are your memories of this? And did anything along those lines actually happen?
It's the first I've ever heard of that.
Okay.
TitleMatchNetwork.com